So if you'd like to start off and kick it off.
Good evening. My name is Tom French, and I'm the chairman for this committee. The purpose of this committee is, and I've had a lot of people calling me personally about this, so I want to try and make it very clear. It's trying to determine how we balance site mission and pension payments. And it's not, as some people have asked me, are you going to save my pension? No, I'm not here to do that. We're trying to figure out how to save everything. And so that's kind of the bigger goal of this committee. It's a limited time committee. It won't go on forever. It'll go on till May. And so we have agreed as a committee that the first things we're going to do is educate ourselves. And unfortunately, we have Jim Barry here to get us started in our learning process. And we may have one other educational meeting, depending on how much we understand after this one. And so the members of the committee are Gil Allensworth, Bob Doer, Tom French, Dan Kaminsky, Earl Shepard, Nita Spinelli, Joyce Underwood, and Bobby Williams. Now, because Gil has just been elected chairman and Bob is stepping down from the cab, his term is up. So we're going to have some changes to the committee, which we will do at the next full board meeting. So I just want to let everybody know that. So you want to kick it off, Jim? And
sure. Tom, excuse me. This is Bob Dorcap. Before, this is a procedural question. So before the presentation, and I had talked to James about this, because of the issue you just raised, where we have some of the committee members, their tenures will sunset at the end of January with this, with the CAB. I was going to suggest that formal minutes be taken of this committee so that when, say, new committee members get appointed to this committee, assuming that we go beyond January of 2018. But James brought up the point, which is that this meeting, this committee meeting, the minutes are being recorded. James, go ahead.
Right, you have your recordings on YouTube. So when you bring in new members, I think one of the best courses of action really is beyond just minutes. And really, I'd recommend this for almost everything you do. Ask your new members to watch old meetings and watch the old recordings that you have, because I think hearing that and hearing questions asked as opposed to just straight reading them is going to be far more beneficial and provide a lot more education than just simply reading something would do. So I think that when you have your turnover in the spring, we'll point them back to these recordings and make sure that everyone is up to speed.
Yeah, and they'll also have the slides from tonight, so you'll have that in front of you while you're looking at the recordings. Should be good. Good update.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay. Jim?
Okay. It's not doing anything. No.
She's pulling it up. Give her just a second. She's...
Okay, there you go. So what I've put together for discussion tonight is intended as an educational presentation to on the plan to kind of create a baseline understanding of what we're dealing with here. I plan to capture questions as best I can, and probably with the help of James, so that we can answer those questions. If I can't answer them tonight, we can answer them in future meetings. I do have the actuary, David Jarrett with Conduit, ready, willing, and able to come down. I didn't feel like that was worth the expense tonight just to set a baseline understanding, but if there's questions that the committee has for David, he can be here in January. I've already put him on notice that we'll have a meeting early in January. What I'll tell you is that I am so sorry. Didn't put that on vibrate. What I'll tell you is that I've been working with this plan since 2013. I feel like I have my arms around it, but my fingers don't touch. And every time I think my fingers are going to touch, a nuance comes up that I learned something new. So I'm probably as well versed in this plan as anybody that could be talking to you tonight, but I don't have all the questions, and I'll tell you that right up front. So moving on to talk about some key facts about the plan. This plan became effective in 1989 when Westinghouse assumed management of the site from DuPont, and it was set up to mimic the DuPont benefits, the DuPont plan. So it was essentially a mirror image of the DuPont plan at that time. The primary benefit paid to retirees is 1.2% of the last 3 year, of the 3 highest year average salary times their service. So 30 years times the average of the last 3 years, generally speaking, of their salary, because that's usually the highest, times 1.2%, and that's generally how the benefit is calculated. There are 2 other calculations, but this is the primary one that's used. It has a 5-year vesting requirement. If someone was in the plan for just 4 years, they would leave the site. They would receive no vested benefit. But we have a lot of folks that were in the plan for at least 5 years who terminated from the site prior to being retirement age, and they're what we call our terminated vested employees. Let me draw your attention to the pie chart down in the bottom right-hand corner. One thing I want to point out is we have 4,088 active participants in the plan between SRNS and SRR, and this is as of January 1st of this year. And we had 9,700 retired folks and 3,200 terminated vested. So in essence, we had 25% of the participants in the plan were still active, and 76% are either retired or they're terminated vested with benefit that's going to be paid out at some point in the future. Retirement is, there's 3 different retirements, generally speaking, that we're talking about. An early retirement, the earliest that you can get 100% of your calculated benefit is if at age 58 and 30 years of service. The earliest you can retire is 50 years old and 15 years service, and that benefit is about 50% of the accrued benefit you have to date. We have an optional retirement in cases of workforce restructuring where it drops down to age 45 and 25 years of service, and that's about a 35% benefit. Okay, so that's what we refer to as the optional retirement. Normal retirement age is age 65. Most of the folks that we see retiring out of the plan are somewhere beneath age 65. They don't wait until the normal retirement age, because as you can see from the first bullet, they can achieve 100% of their earned benefit up until that point at age 58. The death benefit is the ERISA minimum death benefit, roughly 50% of the accrued benefit. So, in other words, if we had an employee unfortunately pass away before he retired, the way the plan works is we assume he retired the day before he died, and his spouse could receive 50% of his accrued benefit up until that point. The plan currently covers employees of SRNS and SRR, but it was closed to new hires of SRNS at the contract transition date of August 1st, 2008. And when the liquid waste contract went into place in July of 2009, it was closed to new hires of the Savannah River Remediation Company. And employees who voluntarily switch employers, so if someone leaves SRR and goes to work for SRNS, they're no longer eligible under the plan, and they become eligible as new hires under the enhanced 401k that we have in place for new hires since then. How do we administer the plan? What kind of oversight do we provide? We have a Savings and Pension Administrative Committee that's made up of 7 members. 5 are SRNS. Actually, today, that slide is wrong. There's 4 SRNS and 2 FLOR. I'm the chair of that committee. The other person with FLOR is a human resource director stationed in Dallas. She used to be here on site, so she's well versed in the plan. And we have 2 SRR representatives on the committee. We meet at least on a quarterly basis, sometimes more often than that. And what the committee is responsible for is the investment performance, the investment strategy, any plan design changes that are made to the pension plan, as well as contracting for services that are needed by the plan, such as, you can see at the bottom, the investment consultant, the actuary, legal, and the auditors. The plan is, we, the committee, are the plan administrator, an important distinction, but we delegate those responsibilities to the SRS Benefits Administration Department for actually running the plan. And the committee also provides oversight for the defined contribution plans and investments that enhanced for the 401k plan for pension eligible, and then the enhanced 401k plan for the new hires. We rely heavily on Aon Hewitt, a major investment consulting firm, for investment advice. We're the first to admit that that's not our strength individually. That's not my background. I have a long accounting background. I have a long financial background, but I'm not an investment person. So we have Aon Hewitt giving us advice on the investment of the assets. And important distinction, they're a plan fiduciary. So they have skin in the game just like the rest of us on the committee. They, if there was something that went wrong, they're on the hook just as we are. Just talk about some of the things the committee's done in the last few years to help manage the plan and bring it up to what we consider the correct status. We did an actuarial study in 2016. There was one previously done in around 2011. And these are the assumptions that are used when we calculate the liability of the plan. This was really important because the retirement trends for SRS were changed over the last few years. The last major restructuring that SRS had was back in 2011. When you have restructurings and layoffs that are occurring periodically, that affects the calculation of the liability, because part of the calculation is when are people going to retire. And retiring early as a result of a workforce restructuring is actually more expensive for the plan because the benefit, the earlier somebody retires, it's more of a subsidized benefit coming out of the plan. So we took a look at that in 2016. I knew that the demographics were changing with regard to when people were retiring. But what we found is we had very little change in the liability. I'll talk about it in a minute, but the liability right now is $3 to $4 billion, depending on how you calculate it. And when we looked at the actuarial assumptions, it only changed the total liability by about $40 million. So it wasn't a major impact on the plan liability. But we're comfortable now with the actuarial assumptions that we're currently using. Between 2010 and 2012, we went through a diversification of plan assets. What happened in the early mid-2000s was the plan was heavily invested in the U.S. stock market, pretty much 60% in the market, 30% in fixed income, and about 10% in cash and cash-like investments, which really brought great returns for a period of time in the 2000s until the financial crisis of 2008 hit, and then we took a pretty solid hit on our investments because we were so heavily leveraged in the markets. What we have today is a broad portfolio that includes real estate, small portion of real estate. We're still heavily invested in the market, don't get me wrong, but it's large cap, it's small cap, it's mid cap, it's international. We spread the risk among many different types of investments to balance the risk that we're taking with the money in the plan, balance that risk against reasonable returns. The way we have it invested right now is, if you see in your own portfolio, the market's up 20-25% this year. We're not up 20 or 25% this year. We're up like 11% this year. And that's because our managed portfolio is such that we are going after returns, but we don't want to put so much of the investments at risk, so we're kind of protected on the downside, if you will. So we're not achieving the high rates of return that you might personally be seeing, but we're also hedged a great deal against any downturns. We also looked at the plan provisions in 2011 to try to rein in some of the cost. We froze the employer-paid death benefits, which were very generous. And if you have any specific questions on those, I'm going to have to defer those until January when David's here, because I tried to talk through with him today, and I really wasn't following exactly what he said. We eliminated an incapability retirement supplement. We had some folks, when they went out on permanent disability, we would have a supplement paid for out of the plan for 6 months until they achieved their Social Security benefits. That was just seen as kind of unnecessary because the Social Security benefits were going to come through. And then finally, for highly compensated folks that were receiving incentive compensation, we removed that incentive compensation from pensionable earnings. Previously, it was 50% of any incentive payments that a SRS employee got counted toward the calculation of the average salary and calculation of their benefit, and we've removed that from their calculations in 2011. Probably one of the most important things we need to understand is the plan liability itself. Just to look at the pie chart on the right now, before I go through a whole lot of the detail, the calculated liability today is $3.1 billion. What does that represent? And I'll talk about that in a minute. But we have plan assets of $2.6 billion and therefore an unfunded liability of $500 million. That's based on the IRS mandated calculation methodology, and let me go through the stuff on the left-hand side of the sheet now. The pension plan liability is the net present value, and I don't know if you understand what the net present value is, but if you drop down a couple of bullets, basically it's the future liability of all the cash stream payments that we're going to make out of the plan discounted to today using an interest rate. That's what it is. The actual payments that we're going to make out of the plan, if I was to just shut it down and look at it today, is $6.7 billion, but the liability that we recognize is the discounted liability back to today. We're going to be making payments. I saw we turned it in as part of an analysis that we do every year. Actuarially speaking, if we never shut the plan down, we'd still be making payments on this plan until 2102, I think, based on how long people might live. Very small payments at that point, but nonetheless, we'd still be making payments. The plan liability is based on actuarial assumptions. How long are people going to live? How long are our active employees going to live? How long are our retirees going to live? What's the marital status of the participants, and what's the relative age of the spouses at retirement? Do you have a plan where all the spouses are 10 years younger than the employees? Are they similar? So we go through all that because as the employee, the pension participant dies, there's still a payment that's going to be made to the surviving spouse. What's the age at which the retirement benefits are going to start? When is somebody going to retire? That has an impact on what the total liability is, because you combine that with how long you expect them to live. And what are the future salary increases for active participants? That's primarily important for the current year. What's their next year salary increase going to be? And we take a look at that. As it turns out, that's a very important amount when you look at people that are just getting ready to retire, because they're at the highest, one of the higher points in their compensation, and they're receiving an increase on that. So it's an important calculation to do. The interest rate right now is 5.89%, and that's mandated by the IRS. You and I both know that we can't go out and invest money at 5.89%. So what I'll tell you is that interest rate has been artificially held high by congressional action. They did three recent pieces of legislation that affect that interest rate. One was MAP 21, which was moving ahead for progress in the 21st century. HATFA, which was the Highway and Transportation Financing Act, and then the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2015. Each time they held the interest rate high, and what did that do? holding the interest rate high reduces the amount of the contributions that are the minimum contributions that need to go into the plan. Congress, by artificially holding down the contributions, reduced the amount of tax deductions available to corporations as a result of the contributions they were making to the plan, and therefore tax revenue went up. Okay, convoluted, but that's why it was associated with MAP 21 and HATFA particularly. Both of those acts were highway transportation acts. Both of them were to increase the infrastructure of the country, and Congress had to come up with a way to pay for that. So they reduced the tax deduction for pension contributions by reducing the minimum contribution required. For us, as far as being able to get scope done at the site, was a very helpful thing. I wasn't involved in the plan when MAP 21 was passed, but I believe back then, and Joe can correct me, but we were looking down the barrel at $300 and $400 million a year pension contributions back in the 2011-2012 kind of time frame. And had MAP 21 not been passed, we would have had significant scope difficulties and significant personnel impacts at the site if we had to make those kinds of contributions in those years. Like I said, the future payments, if you just look at the cash stream, is about $6.7 billion undiscounted over the life of the participants. And that doesn't include current participants that are in the plan for their future service. That's only what they've accrued up until this point in time. So I talked about the discount rate being artificially held high by Congress at 5.89%. If you look at 2023 and 2024, the interest rate is about 4.2 or about 4.2%. That actually is the market rate that we should be using if there wasn't this legislation in place mandating IRS to give us the higher rates to be used in our calculation of our liability. As we phase out that interest rate support that we have via the last act of Congress, the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2015, you can see what the impacts year by year are going to be as we increase the interest rate or decrease the interest rate going forward in our calculation. Okay, so that kind of sets us up for a discussion about contributions, because contributions is what the impact on each year's budget is going to be to the site. There's three major contributions. By the way, anybody can stop me at any time to ask me questions, because I'm just rolling through this, and we're not going to be talking about this for an hour. So please stop me with questions if you have any.
Jim, we normally wait until you're done with the presentation.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. So there's three major components when we calculate the contribution for any 1 year. The first is the normal cost, and that's just the term that's used, but essentially that's the 1 year service cost of the active employees currently in the plan. So for each year of service, for each year that they're involved in the plan, they accrue additional benefit going forward. And like it says on the sheet, it's the expected cost of the benefit accruals for the current year, and it includes 1 year of additional service plus their expected salary increase for that year. If you look to the right, that number is about $73 million in 2018, going up to $91 million in 2023. Plan expenses is another component of our contribution that we have to make every year. The largest part of the administrative expenses are the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation insurance premium that we pay to a federal trust, federal agency. I don't know how to characterize it, but the PBGC was put in place back in the 70s after major defined benefit pension defaults like LTV and some of the major old steel companies, some of the old manufacturing companies in the Rust Belt. This was put into place to guarantee or protect the benefits for retirees in those defined benefit plans. But we're paying those contributions, and that's the largest piece of the plan expenses. It's about $11 million a year. And then the item that changes, the item that's so impacted by the discount rate, is the amortization of the past service liability. Just to give you a little bit of a history, let's say 10, 15 years ago, the amortization of the past service liability, if you weren't fully funded, was essentially done over about a 15-year period. In the mid-2000s, right before the financial crisis, they passed the Pension Protection Act to tighten up both how the interest rate, where the interest rate came from that you used to calculate the liability, and it also tightened up the period of time over which you amortized that past service liability. So if you were underfunded, once the Pension Protection Act was passed, you had to fund that liability over a 7-year period, not a 15-year period. So the combination of the economy going down, interest rates dropping and staying low, combined with having to amortize or fund that past service liability over a shorter period of time, really caused the pension contributions in any given year to go up. What you're seeing in the pie charts on the right is in FY18 we have about $112 million pension contribution that we have to make. The lion's share of that is actually the normal cost, what's being earned by employees that are currently on site. By the time you drop down to 2023, and these numbers are changing a little bit because our market performance this year is a lot better than what we had anticipated in our calculations, but they're not dropping too substantially. In 2023, we're going to have to make a contribution of $329 million, and as you can see, the lion's share of that, or $225 million, 68% of the contribution is going to be for paying for the unfunded liability from past years. So that's what we're facing going forward. There's a period of about, I'd say, 4 or 5 years where the contributions are going to be between $270 and $320 million for about a 5-year period, and that's from 2022 through about 2026. Huh?
320?
Yeah, I'd say just range it between 275 and 320. So it's going to be a substantial amount of money. I don't know what the total site budget is, but that ends up being a substantial portion of the total site budget. And here's what's going to happen to normal cost over time. Once we get into the early 2020s, we're going to start seeing the normal cost actually start to go down, and that's because the number of active participants in the plan who are still accruing benefit is going to start to decrease. We've all heard some of the demographics, and I think there was a presentation to the full committee a while back that talked about our predictive attrition and when we think people are going to be retiring. We have a bow wave of sorts coming at us, where a lot of folks are going to be retiring over the years. That's good news from a normal cost standpoint, because the normal cost will start to come down in a few years, but it's still going to be a substantial amount of money. And the reason it's going up so much in the 2022, 2023 timeframe up to the mid-90s is not because we're paying folks a whole lot more money in those years. It's also impacted by that discount rate that I was talking to you about before. As that discount rate support goes away, the normal cost that goes into the liability is also increasing. Oh, and you know what? I guessed at the numbers. Here on the next sheet are the real numbers as of the beginning of the year. It's actually in 2022 through 2024, it's $320-some million are going to be the contributions. It really starts going up in 2019, 2020, and the bow wave crashes on us and then starts to come back in 2025, 2026. Now, some of those numbers are higher as of the beginning of this year than they will be at the beginning of next year. And like I said, part of that's because of our performance in the plan, investment performance in the plan. The assumption in the plan is that we will achieve year over year for a long period of time about a 5.8% return on the investments that we have in the plan. This year, I think we're sitting right now at about 10.5%. So we've nearly doubled what our assumption is for this year. But we all know what goes up does come down. It's not going to stay up that high, for the long term. That would not be the correct thing to do. And you can see, I also put the discount rating on here again because it's just so important to keep that discount rate in front of us to see as the discount rate is coming down what's happening to the contributions as we're amortizing that unfunded liability. What I wanted to talk about on this slide was the key drivers for the contributions. And I've broken it down into 4 quadrants: the high impact but not predictable, the high impact but very predictable, and then the low impact, not predictable, and predictable. Start at the bottom right. Administrative expenses are pretty predictable. The piece that's not the PBGC premiums. It's only about $500,000 or so a year for administering the plan. That's some labor, that's some fees that we pay, that's the consultant's expenses. It's not a lot of money. Moving up to the PBGC premiums, that is predictable, but it's not, because legislatively, Congress can at any time change how those calculations are done, what those premiums are. So, but generally they set those premiums and we know what they are, so it doesn't end up having a high impact, but it lacks a bit of predictability. Plan demographics, again, they're fairly low impact and they're very predictable because we understand who is in our plan and we're not adding folks to the plan, so we have our arms well around what the demographics of the plan are. Then let's talk about what's a higher impact. Asset returns, obviously they're going to have a high impact on the contributions going forward, and if we could predict them, we'd all be millionaires, but we can't predict those things. IRS mortality tables, right now it's in the high impact and predictable category. We had it as being not predictable not too long ago because the IRS just changed their mortality tables that we're supposed to use as part of the plan. So now they're high impact and they're predictable because they won't be changing them again anytime soon. When they changed the mortality tables this past year and had us implement them for going forward, they essentially added 2 or 3 years to the lifespan of both active participants and retirees, because folks in the country are living longer and they're finally recognizing that as part of the mortality tables we needed to use in the calculations. The discount rate has a very high impact on the calculations. I've talked about discount rate multiple times here in the calculation of the liability and therefore the calculation of the unfunded liability that we need to fund over time. The discount rates are, right now they're predictable because the legislation that's governing those is running out over time, and we see those interest rates coming down to 4.2%. We can predict it year by year what's going to happen to those interest rates. Going to the other side, high impact, not predictable, is we don't know what Congress is going to do moving forward. Okay, and as I described it to you before, this is a revenue raising tool that they have here by limiting the tax deductions associated with pension contributions for commercial entities. They may very likely, trying to pay for something, do the same thing again and what that would do is pull the contributions back down, and we'd be able to buy more scope, but it would just kick the can down the road. It would push because ultimately we're going to have to fully fund this plan at some point in the future. There's no question about it. It has to be done. It's just a matter of when it's going to be done. Talk about discount rates just a little bit more. I am beating a dead horse, and I know that, so I apologize. But a rule of thumb that we use is that for each percentage point change in the discount rate, the liabilities of the plan are going to change by about $370 million, 12%, for each 1% change in the discount rate. So that just gives you an impact on how much that discount rate impacts both the plan liabilities and the contributions. And I put the projected discount rates again at the bottom, but I won't go over that again. Take a breath. Asset returns. So as I indicated before, we predict, we're forecasting as part of our calculations a 5.8% return on investment over a 10-year horizon. And that's 5.8% per year, but obviously the results are going to vary from that. Some years will be down, some years will be up, but overall we're expecting a 5.8% per year return. That example he has there is not too far from the truth. We have received about a 10.8% return on assets so far this year. We're expecting that when we do our valuation in January that we're going to be able to take advantage of some of those asset returns. The bad news is that you don't get all of that in 1 year. You have to bring in any gains or losses on the assets of the plan over a 2-year period. So as you can see in the example, if we had a plan assets of $2.6 billion and we were expecting $150 million of a return, and we actually received $280 million of return, we would be $130 million higher in our returns than what we had anticipated in the calculations. But because you have to bring those in over a period of time, that gain of $130 million, just as I said before, the shortfall in the liability is amortized over 7 years. So is the gain amortized over 7 years, and you bring it into the calculation over a 2-year period. Yeah, it's really complicated, and that's, if you want to talk more about that, David would have to help me with that. But essentially, if you took the 130 divided by 7, you'd be at $18 million, but the $22 million is interest rate adjusted. David told me that today, and I believe what he said. Essentially, the rule of thumb is whatever gains or losses you have on the plan, it's about a 6-year amortization of those gains. So that's how you get to the $22 million. So even though we had a great year this year, you're not going to see immediate benefit in the pension contribution calculations for next year. Okay? And that's actually good, because if you had a down year too, you don't want the contributions going up significantly just because you had one down year either. So this is a way to kind of, they call this asset smoothing, a term that you're probably well aware of, right? Okay. And I talked a little bit before about the mortality tables. If you have, and I think, I don't know if John did come in. We've seen the pension contributions over the last few years. We continually budget for higher numbers than what we've actually had, what the minimum actually ended up being. And that's because we were anticipating the mortality tables being implemented. We've been anticipating that they've been implemented for the last 3 years. IRS knew about the mortality tables, and it's not the kind of consultant that we have that they were worried about. The people that we have big computers and sophisticated software, and they're able to make changes to mortality tables on the fly almost. What they were worried about were the mom and pop actuaries and whether they were going to be able to implement these mortality tables for small practice type plans that they had. So they continued to put off these calculations. What that did, though, to us was we would continually budget a higher contribution amount than the minimum that got calculated. So there was always a difference between what we were calculating and what we were actually contributing. One thing to say here, and this probably isn't the right time, but I didn't cover it earlier, the DOE guidance from the Deputy Secretary, and I think it goes back into the mid-2000s, is there's a specific guidance out there that you only make the IRS minimum contributions, the ERISA minimum contributions to the plan, unless there is, unless you get specific approval from DOE headquarters to contribute more. 1 year that we needed to do that was, I think, back in 2013. We wanted to increase our contribution by $2.6 million to maintain 80% funding of the plan. And that took 6 weeks to get done. So that's just an indication that we have to get approval to do anything more. The flip side is that we don't have extra money to put in the plan beyond the ERISA minimum, because as this committee is sitting here trying to balance between pension contributions and scope, that's what's happening at the site all the time, is trying to balance the pension and the scope, pension being one of the things that they're trying to balance. As I said, the new tables increase the life expectancy by about 2 years for males and slightly under 3 years for females, age 50. That gives you an idea of what we're talking about. And the new tables, when they're implemented, is about a 5% increase in the overall liability of the plan. So take 3.1 billion times 5%. Immediately, you have that much higher of liability based on the pensions that have been, the pension values that have been earned prior to that point in time. And the last slide I have, and I wish I had water, the last slide I have is just to talk about the contributions. This is what's happening to them over time, and these are the why they're changing. The orange bar is the 2017 baseline assumptions. The green is showing what the discount rate impact is on those contributions as we go through those years, and you can see in some of those, in those middle years where the bars are so high, there's a high impact as a result of the discount rate changing. And then the red bar is the impact on the contributions from the change in the mortality tables, recognizing that people are living longer. So I've done all the talking. That was intended to be the first educational discussion of the plan, and now I'm open to questions, and if I can't answer them, I will write them down so we can come back. Is that good? You're happy with that?
Thank you. Great presentation.
That was really good.
Okay.
I didn't like what you said, but
There you go.
Let's start with Bob, and then we'll go over here to Tom.
Thank you, James. Bob Dorcab. Jim, I want to thank you, as you've heard already from the committee, that this was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
You really laid things out very clearly, and it's for a guy who's been involved in finance for a lot of years, this is very enlightening as to how pension plans have evolved over the years. And I also want to say that Aon Hewitt, as the plan fiduciary, they're an excellent company. I know they administer a number of defined benefit pension plans for a lot of corporations. So their advice and their knowledge is very good. And so this plan is in good hands in terms of managing the future liabilities, in my opinion. Jim, I want to ask you, though, I'm a bit of a dinosaur, I guess, when it comes to defined benefit pension plan asset allocation. Back in the early 90s, and I'm not coming after you with this, I just need some education. When I was trained in corporate finance back in the late 80s, early 90s, defined benefit contribution plans were 100% invested in bonds, be it U.S. government bonds, corporate bonds, whatever. And of course, they managed credit risk to the point where there was virtually no default on the principal. And it was simply an issue of calculating duration with interest rates and future liabilities. And what I'm hearing now is that, and the government allows this, is that corporate defined benefit pension plans are investing in the stock market, real estate, which is high risk, high volatility, and it creates a lot of uncertainty in terms of what assets will be available with the expected liabilities in the future. So at what point did that, or I don't know if you know, I mean, at what point did that switch over from just as an example, the Social Security Administration, they just invest 100% in U.S. Treasuries, period. There's no stock market investment. There's no real estate investments. There's no, it's all, duration with bonds. Now, I realize interest rates with bonds have gone way down because of monetary policy in the United States to manipulate, the economy. But when did that switch over?
I really don't know when it switched over. My background is I came to the site with Westinghouse and I worked at the site in the financial organization, but in the period of time that I was on site between 1989 and 2002, I had no involvement in the pension plan or the administration committee. I do know that by 2000, I know late in the late 90s, they were invested in the stock market. I don't know what drove that. I don't know what the reason was. I don't know if that was a change. I can't really speak to that. And one of the things I do want to correct is we have a small investment in REITs, in real estate investment trusts. It's not a large investment. We're not, we're going into high quality investments in that arena. Your question though about why return seeking funds instead of just asset protecting funds? The fact of the matter is that if we invested all in fixed income funds and bond funds, our contributions would be even higher because our return would be anticipated at the 2 or 3% level instead of the 5 or 6% level. So, as a planned fiduciary, we have to try to balance that risk. When do we get out of the markets is probably a really good question. We would start to get out of the markets and start to be more concerned about eliminating the risk and just getting down to fixed income kind of funds once we get closer to full funding of the plan. Once you're close to 100% funded, then it makes all the sense in the world not to risk any of your principal in the future and just have it available for payouts going forward. The fact is, right now, we're not in that position.
Jim, and just a follow-up question then. This plan, like other defined benefit pension plans, are administered through the federal government by the ERISA laws? Is that
Yes.
Right. So the federal government is the one who allowed pension plans, corporate pension plans, to invest in the stock market. They said, hey, either you take more risk with your pension benefits, or the discount rate's going to skyrocket because if you just stay in fixed assets, then the discount rate, the implied return rate will be so low that the pension contributions will skyrocket. I mean, I think that's...
That may be. I just don't know.
Yeah.
Can we take that as a question for the January meeting and get back to you on that?
That'd be fine.
Yeah, sure.
Are you helping record?
Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to know the history of when it really, like, when corporate pension plans transitioned away from, just computing duration with fixed assets over to taking market risk with the stock market. Because, obviously the volatility is very high when you invest assets in the stock market. Like this year, oh yeah, everything's great. And then all you need is a recession and the stock market goes down and then the contributions will spike again.
Maybe one add-on to that. By the way, my name is Joe Davia, and I'm with the DOE.
Joe, can I get you to hit the microphone? That way we can record it for everybody online.
Okay. My name is Joe Davia, and I'm with the Department of Energy, and I have a relationship with Jim, but he and I work together on these.
I like that second.
We work together on the pension plan. But anyway, one thing just related to what you were saying, Bob, is the SRNS commissioned or worked with Aon to do the mixing of the investments. So they're getting, what is the alpha or the beta, Jim, that they were working with, that there's less risk with the plans for the same amount of return, basically what they've done by matching the stock market investments with
Bonds, fixed assets,
and all,
or fixed income, right?
and all those things. So they've worked very hard to protect the investments rather than, yeah.
And one of the things that I didn't have on the slide with recent committee activities is we're also in the process of finalizing an asset and liability study for the plan, which gets at this issue of returns versus the risk. And it's a very sophisticated program that Conduit Investment folks are going through. They're running they call it stochastic analysis, but essentially it's a random analysis of 1,000 different cases of what might happen in the market based on certain parameters that are built in. And what we're trying to do in that is to make sure that we're not taking unnecessary risk for the returns that we're getting, and that we're not targeting excessive returns that would drive us to a higher risk profile. To properly manage the assets, we have to invest. If we went into fixed income funds, the contributions would be so high that nobody could take them. So we have to take a certain amount of risk, but the key here is to balance that risk versus the returns we're getting. And as Joe said, what we're finding is that this study is showing us that for the returns that we're getting, we're taking a little bit more risk than we should be. So here in the not too distant future, I expect that we're going to be balancing the investments to pull back a little bit on the risk and still maintain the returns that we're getting.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, that was really the only point I wanted to make, and I'll turn it over to other people. But traditionally, when you have defined liabilities, which you can clearly compute based on reasonable mortality tables, and you know who the employees are, and you can assume reasonable salary increases over time. You can compute a very reasonable liability number, very defendable, pretty exact liability number. But when it really goes back to the 1990s, when the interest rates were pushed down by, say, the Federal Reserve, and corporate rates went down. The rate of return on bonds became so low that pension plans, not just this one, but pension plans in general, were forced to invest in the stock market to get some kind of reasonable rate of return. The risk level just skyrocketed when pension plans did that. And everything worked out great throughout the 1990s. And then, in 2001, we had a major recession. We had a major stock market correction. And then we had another 5-6 good years. And then we had another asset bubble. And so pension plans have taken a major hit twice within a 10-year period. And of course, now we have another asset bubble in the stock market. So it's reasonable to assume that over the next 3-4 years that you're going to have another stock market correction. So,
Hey, Bob, I don't mean to interrupt.
And I'm going to stop.
Okay, we don't. I think it's important for this committee to understand that we've got a fixed investment profile on the pension. You've outlined it, plus or minus a few percent. It's going to be a big hit in the mission. Now, whatever happens, I think the pension's well managed. It was a good presentation, Jim. I appreciate it. But for the committee, we need to understand a couple of other items, how the pension gets carried across contracts. And I'm going to ask you a few questions if I can.
Sure. And if I can't answer them, I'll tell you I can't answer.
Yeah, I'm really asking these questions to put them on the record. So this is a simple-minded question, but who actually owns the pension? SRS owns the pension?
SRNS and SRR are the plan sponsors for the pension.
Okay. And they're LLCs, and they're actually controlling it under DOE's direction to some extent.
DOE's oversight, I guess, is as far as I'd be willing to go there.
Okay.
I got to be really careful with the terms I use. Joe knows this too.
Yeah.
There's folks in headquarters that are very very particular about how we describe DOE's participation in these plans.
Okay.
These are privately sponsored. This is a privately sponsored plan by the contractors, whose costs are fully reimbursed by the DOE.
Okay. That's a good answer. And when you transition a contract, so let's say when you guys took over, how do you transition the pension? Is that a transfer of all the assets to the next contractor? And you don't have to answer it tonight. I just want to put that on record. That's something I would like to understand.
Well, and I'll answer pieces of it, but maybe not the whole thing. The assets of the plan are held in a master trust. So those are not assets of Fluor or the partners or AECOM and their partners. They're assets of the plan trust. The administration of the plan has been, and I expect in the future, will be part of the contract requirements. that the DOE places on the new contractors coming in to continue to be sponsors of the plan.
Okay. So you would transfer, let's say somebody else took over, SRS would transfer that fund to the new contractor to manage.
Well, the responsibility for managing the trust.
Okay.
And managing the plan,
All right.
yes.
Good, thank you. And one other question, and we don't really know the answer, but I want to put it on the record. I would like to know where Savannah River ranks in funding of the plan versus other DOE sites. And I know we've asked that question a lot. I know the Retirees Association has asked for a study to be done, but nobody has a number yet. And I just want to put that on the record, not really for you, Jim. And one other thing, and I've been asked this a bunch of times, if something happens and the pension here failed for whatever reason, and we've been paying careful. We've been paying insurance to this federal agency, right? And will they pay back out at 100% or some portion of the liability?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
And to be honest with you, it's not something that we've ever really considered because of the unique nature of this plan and the full reimbursability of the cost of the plan by the Department of Energy.
Uh-huh.
So it's not something that we've really dug into what would happen if the plan failed. We just don't see that as a real possibility.
Yeah, and I'm really not thinking of a failure, but I'm thinking if if the payments get up to $300 million a year, and then you're at 18% or whatever the site budget, somebody has to make some hard decisions, which is why we started this whole conversation of where do you take a nick, right? So I'm just trying to determine all those ancillary pieces.
Got it.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
You're
Appreciate it.
Joyce Underwood, CAB. First, I have a question about, probably for you. Are they going to give us another presentation at the January meeting?
It's entirely possible. I know that Joe's taking a lot of the action items from tonight, and they're going to devise what is maybe lacking, and then based off of what other questions you have, where we need to go.
Would
from
it be
here.
possible if you guys ever give another presentation for lay people such as myself who do not have any kind of financial background to put at the end of your presentation a definitions page? That would
Yeah.
be really super helpful.
That's I really appreciate that idea, and I live in the land of acronyms out at the site, and I apologize. We should have done that. We should have defined them all for you.
You're fine.
And just for your own peace of mind, when
yeah.
we post this online, we're going to get an acronym page for this. That was
Well,
gonna
not
be
just the
something I was gonna
acronyms,
ask you guys in the morning.
I don't know what an actuary or liability is, so it's like
So
all
it's
over
more
my
than
head.
just the acronyms; it's everything.
It's
Okay.
everything, yeah. Anything that's like, glossary. Yeah, I would really appreciate that because I followed it as well as I could, but I'm very lost. So my following questions might be a little ignorant, and they might be in here, and I don't know. So let me see if I can ask these in the order that is going to build on top of the other. With your little pie chart on page 2, the 2 green pieces equal 4,088 people who are paying in. How much are they total paying in per year? Is that on here? And
Yeah.
I missed it?
I guess the best way to say is they're accruing benefits. They're not really paying into the plan. So those are folks that are working at the site that are pension eligible. For each year of service, they accrue an additional benefit into the plan. Those are the folks that are currently working in the site. The total that are pension eligible, the total of the benefits accrued each year for those folks is in the neighborhood of $75 to $90 million. And that's something that we talked about on other pages of the
Okay.
Joyce, I think you're thinking kind of like a 401k.
Maybe.
This isn't a 401k.
Okay.
This is a defined benefit. So by working out at the site, if you're in this plan, you get this. You don't have to pay into it to get it. It's a benefit of your employment.
So green's
So-
not funding orange and red?
No.
No.
Okay.
No. So basically, if you work, you don't make a decision of how much money you want to put into it like you're thinking.
Okay.
It's actually it's a pension. So just by working there, let's say you're going to get, I'm making up a number. Let's say you're going to get $50,000 a year when you retire. You didn't put $1 into that. You worked out there and you earned that.
So it's like part of your salary.
It's part of your,
Ish.
total compensation.
Okay.
I was making it more simple than trying to get it across.
So this whole pie chart is
Okay.
by DOE.
Okay. Okay.
There you go.
So that's not like there's no product. That's just paid out.
Right, DOE transfers money to the manager of the fund based on liability for the year.
Okay. So that money comes from DOE's budget.
Right.
Okay.
So the real reason for this pie chart is just to explain that, we have 17,000 participants in the plan, but there's only 4,000 that are currently active working. So a lot of the legacy problem that we're dealing here in liability and contributions really has to do with the orange and the red. And we've never been fully funded to pay their benefits that we owe them.
Okay. Do you have an estimated median value of the benefit that's paid out right now per employee?
No.
No.
We'll have to
That's
take that
really
one as a
hard to
question. No, I'm sure I can get it. I just don't know it off the top of my head.
Okay. I guess maybe you guys already answered this, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I want to know. Would buyout on any level for any of these people be beneficial whatsoever?
We have done that. 2 years ago, we did a buyout of everybody. We can't force it, but we offered a buyout of the actuarially calculated accrued benefit for all the terminated vesteds that had a benefit of less than $20,000 total. Their total benefit was less than $20,000. The cost of that over time was the same as what we would see in a pension benefit guarantee premium reduction. So we balanced it. We didn't want to cause more liability into the plan by buying those folks out, but we balanced it. We did buy out, and Joe, I don't remember the number of people that we bought out.
Yeah, I'd have to look that up.
Yeah, we can get you some of that information, but we ran a buyout program not too long ago, but we limited it to $20,000 because that was the break even. We didn't want the buyout to cost to increase the liability of the plan.
Were the people that bought out at that time green people or orange and red people?
They would have been red.
They would have been red
Red
people.
only.
Okay.
We could not buy out active retirees, and we could not buy out current participants.
If you were to do it now and offer it to green active participants, would they then have the opportunity to reinvest in that enhanced 401k?
No, they'd take
It's a defined
they would
benefit,
take
then
it.
you could take the.
They would take it to wherever they wanted.
They would take it to wherever they want to
if
take
they
it.
did that.
If
but
they
you
did
would-
that.
it would destroy the plan. If they did that.
Okay.
And the reason we can't do it is if you go to the slide where it shows the $3.1 billion liability and $2.6 billion in assets, we don't have enough assets to buy
Okay.
people out. We would have to put more money in to be able to buy them out. Does that make sense?
I see. Yeah. I thought that might have been the problem, but I didn't know. So that's why I asked. Okay, my last question is on page 5. You talk about the future pension payments expected to total $6.7 billion over the life of the participants, and then you said that something about it was going to go to 2102. Is that like the estimated time when the last widow of the last person who
Yep.
dies?
That's it.
Okay.
That's it exactly.
Okay. Well, that's all my questions. I don't know if that was helpful, but thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Oh, thanks. No, I still have more questions.
Yes, sir.
Gil?
Oh, I'm
Hey,
sorry.
just quick, and I don't think you said. Thank you very much for everything. I mean, that's great. $11 million a year is going to the PBGC.
Right.
Okay, and $500,000 for plan administration. And then you mentioned a managed portfolio as well. Can we get a breakdown of that? I mean, I don't think you're going to have
Of-
it tonight.
No, I don't.
Because-
Of the portfolio?
Yeah.
Yeah, I should have actually brought a copy of what we're invested in. We, like I
Oh,
said,
no, the investment I'm okay with. It's just I understand what you're sharing. I think that it's to Aon Hewitt and Conduit for. I mean, that's just really cheap.
oh,
That's really inexpensive.
Yeah.
$500,000 for a $2.6 billion liability, and Aon Hewitt's acting as a full fiduciary.
yeah.
That's impressive.
And I might be rounding the 500,000, but it's not significantly beyond that.
Oh no, if it's that low, that's very impressive. But I'm wondering, I'm just wondering, if there's, so we have you have a fee for Aon Hewitt, you have a fee for Conduit, and then there's a managed portfolio. I would like to see if we can see a breakdown of those fees.
Sure. We'll put something together for it.
Thanks.
I have a question. Sure. Is there more questions?
Well, we got some more from board members, and then once we finish it with the board members, we'll come back around.
Okay, that's cool, okay.
Yeah,
Can I go on the board?
Yes,
Certainly
always.
can. We're always looking for volunteers.
Always accepting applications. Go for it. We'll get you Bob, and then we'll come
Yeah, I'll be brief. Bob Door Cab. Okay. Jim, again, excellent presentation. Jim, just for the record, so that people understand the discount rate. I think you made a very interesting point, if I understood it right. The discount rate is regulated by the U.S. government. Is that correct?
Currently, the interest rate we use in the calculations is the methodology is defined by the IRS in accordance with the legislation out of Congress.
Thank you. So the 5.89%, they're allowing pension plans to discount their future pension liabilities by 5.89%. And and I thought what I heard from you, which was that by keeping that discount rate higher, it lowers the benefit contributions that have to be made, and it creates more taxable dollars for corporate income tax.
For the government.
For the government.
Correct.
So, knowing that the U.S. government is in the process of trying to lower corporate rates and raise the federal deficit, I'm not asking you to answer this question. I guess I'm throwing this out, is that there may be a need for the federal government, because they need more money, more tax money, that they may, in fact, increase the discount rate instead of trending it down, as your pro forma shows, which would, in fact, decrease your future pension liabilities over the coming years. That could, in fact, happen.
That could.
Because they need more tax dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that everyone should be aware of. And I just wanted to read that into the record. I can see that kind of scenario happening.
Right. It happened,
before.
It happened twice after MAP 21. And it could happen again. We're just not in the business of predicting that. We have to go with what we know today.
Okay. Thank you. Do you mind if we get Dan?
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, thank you. Either way is good with me. Dan Kaminsky, CAB, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very thorough, having been through several buyouts myself. It all made pretty darn good sense if you've gone through it a couple times. So when you're older, you'll know these things. Just a couple fill in the blanks. This really doesn't matter a whole lot to some of what we're talking about. But just so I kind of have a good picture of what the actual benefit is, there's no medical benefits tied to this, correct?
Not as part of this plan. There are post-retirement medical benefits at the site for these folks, for the pension eligible folks, for the defined benefit pension eligible folks, but that's not part of this liability.
Perfect. And the surviving spouse, is that a standard, or is there an optional surviving spouse type option that are different payouts?
We'll have to take that. I don't know that detail.
Just curious, just to have the complete picture.
Oh, you know that one?
Yes. There's two parts to that question. The first is, when the person retires, they get to choose how they want to split that up. They have several different options. It could be 50% joint and survivor annuity, 80-20, just a number of different options. So every retiree has that choice. In terms of projecting the liability for the plan, they take the actuarial tables and say, on average, this is how it works out. So as the plan sponsors plan their contributions, this is the average. Jim, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. One of the actuarial assumptions is, is a look at the demographics. What are people doing when they retire? What survivor benefit are they signing up for? And how old are their spouses? So that all works into the calculation.
Right. But then when the person retires, they get to choose how they want to
That's correct.
split it up.
The
Right.
death benefit that I was talking about before is really for somebody who has a vested benefit that dies prior
Right,
to
but that's different.
exercising that, right?
That's
Is
completely
that,
different.
I'm sorry, can I jump in?
Sure.
Is that a lump sum benefit, or is that?
Only if you have a microphone, though.
I don't have a microphone. Is that a lump sum benefit, or do they take it as a pension, as they take it up?
Take it as an annuity pension.
As an annuity pension?
Yeah.
Thanks.
So as the green bars in the chart on page 2 goes down, all those assumptions with surviving spouse all kind of settle themselves as you're moving down the road here anyway. Is there, from a calculation perspective, is there a huge difference between those options, depending on what the retiree selects, or is it fairly cost neutral?
It is cost neutral. Actuarially, it's cost neutral. And here's what I would tell you. The benefit that a retiree has accrued over his career is the benefit. Then he's choosing how to receive that benefit. If he signs up for a higher payment to a spouse, his current benefit is actually reduced, so that money's available. So the benefit, actuarially speaking, that retiree, regardless of how he signs up to take his benefit, if he lives exactly how long and his spouse lives exactly how long the mortality tables would predict that they would live, that benefit payout would be exactly the same regardless of how he took that benefit.
Thanks for, especially for people who are not familiar
That
with
was
that.
a
That was
good
a very good explanation of that. And on, just as a matter of request for information, and I think we had some of this on a prior slide somewhere at some point, but could we add the actual payouts compared to the contributions over the years?
The payouts to the retirees,
Yeah.
we have that information.
I'm not, wait, can you say it in a different, use different words?
The actual annual payment you make to retirees.
Okay, all right, yes,
Yep.
yes.
Over the life of the plan. Even if it's an Excel spreadsheet, if we could distribute that to us electronically, I'd just like to get comfortable with that curve and see where it all goes.
All right.
And then I thought I had one other question on that topic, but I'm not seeing it. So I'll defer to someone else.
Let me verify the numbers, but let me give you something off the top of my head. I think currently our pension payroll is about $90 million a year.
Wow.
That gives you an idea. Well, you look at the number of people that are retired.
No, I'm comparing it versus the 300 million that's coming in 2022.
Right.
That's what I'm going, wow.
Right.
Yeah, but at least you've got 3/4 of the people already in the plan, so that's light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
A little bit, yeah.
And we just are trying to avoid it being a train.
We have the drill bit on the front of the train trying to get to the end of that
So-
tunnel.
And actually, I just recalled what the other topic was that we had talked about. Someone had asked for, you had asked for the breakdown of the fees. Could we have an actual copy of the plan? Would that be something that could be distributed?
Yeah, it's public.
Okay.
Yeah, that's public record. The plan. You get the 5,500 you can get the 5,500 online.
Yeah, true. The plan is like, I don't know, it's a huge document, and it's all legalese. There's a summary plan description, which, you were saying that summary plan description is
That's
much
what I'm more
easier to
familiar with
read.
anyway, so I'm ready for your choice.
So that's readily available, and we can get that to you electronically.
I was in Carol's office this week and saw a really nice summary plan document that they had put together, and it's in review right now. It's a glossy version. It's about 15 pages and has all the key information. I don't know if she showed it to you yet, but
No.
it looks like we're on the verge
And
of
Gil,
having
that would
something
probably
that
have
would
the
be
same, like, general report information showing assets and all that good
without
stuff.
going to the 5,500.
So once you get that approved, we can pass that
5,500
around.
gives
To,
you-
Yes.
It's going to be, on this plan, probably 100 pages long.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Before you continue on, Tom, I know that we want to hit everybody's questions. We actually are a little bit past the time for public comment. And I want to delineate here because I know that you had a question. We need to make sure that what we do are public comments at this point in time, and then we'll come back and we'll finish any questions for CAB members, and we'll go to the public. And I think if we need to go a little bit long this evening, as long as the discussion's productive, are you okay with that? Okay. So we'll plan around that. So is there any, not necessarily comments right now, but not any questions right now, but any comments from the public?
I could make mine a comment.
We come up to the microphone then.
Okay. And if you'd identify yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm a retiree from Savannah Riverside, okay? So this struck interest to me, definitely, and I appreciate everything you said. All the questions are very good. Glad to see that the plan is in really good hands.
Thank you.
So just with that, that's a comment part. I just want to throw a curve out there. We've got a president right now that wants tax reform, and tax reform is going to have an impact on our economy. So therefore, we're going to be in a different ball game, I think, with the passing. I'm positive on that tax reform, by the way. I think it's going to be a great thing for the American people, for the workers and everything else. But it's going to have an exponential upturn into jobs, people making more money. So I don't know. I see a positive in that. What is? Can I ask a question? I mean, what is your thought on that as far as impact? Because I think this is a real thing that's going to happen in the very near future. And it could happen in 2018, and it might roll out to 2019 and future years. Jim?
Yeah, I'm thinking about that. I'm trying to think about how to answer that in relation to the pension plan. Again, those things might happen, and those would be good things for the plan if the markets continues to go up, if the economic activity increases, believe it or not, if the interest rates increase,
They will.
that's another positive. That would have another positive impact on some of the future contributions to this plan. So all those would be good things. However, I can't predict any of those things, and especially in the administration of this plan, we can't count on any of that happening. We just have to go with what we know right now.
All right.
And then kind of roll into it as
So-
it starts rolling into place. Start change as it rolls into place. Okay, I'm going to have to go because we have a commitment at home. But again, many thanks. It's great meeting you.
You're welcome.
So do we have any other comments? Let's try to keep it at comments, please. And then we'll do questions later, I promise. But if we can keep it at comments.
Thank you all.
Make a comment, no questions.
So would you identify yourself, Mr.
My,
Swalina?
my name's Andy Swalina. I'm a retiree, so I'm a benefit of all of this business. And the comment I'd like to make is sooner or later this committee is going to be making trade-off decisions about whether you spend money on scope or whether you spend money on pension plans. And I'd just like to point out to you, and I brought some numbers with me which I'll pass around. There's maybe only 10 copies there, so some of you could share. If you go to Jim's slide number 2, you'll see there the way the pension is calculated. There's a pension multiplier in there. That pension multiplier for Savannah Riverside is 1.2. This is a comparison of the pension multiplier at other DOE sites. And as you can see, this pension plan is the least generous plan in the entire DOE complex. So keep that in mind as you go trying to make decisions between scope and funding those who won the Cold War for you, that this is not a generous plan. So we need to keep those kind of things in mind. It's been that way for some time. The other sites are their pension plans are closer to 100% than ours. For some reason, we've been stingy on funding our plan here at Savannah Riverside. So I think those kind of things need to be kept in mind when you make those decisions. This is not a terribly generous plan.
Andy, can I ask where the information came from?
Yeah, the Savannah Riverside Retiree Association did a survey of the other sites, of the other DOE sites. We have presented this to a number of organizations and not gotten very good answers. So we have asked the Congressional Research Service to do a study on all of the plans across the DOE complex and come back and tell us what it would take to make it equitable across the complex. And this is one page out of the request to the Congressional Research Service for that. That study with the Congressional Research Service is in progress. Last word I got, they're working on it. But, you know, as with most requests to the CRS, you never know where you get in the pecking order. That's my only comments. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, yeah.
Tom, let's keep it rolling.
Yeah, this is Tom French, the cab. I think we need to be very careful. We need to understand the pension, and Jim did an excellent job. We can't redesign the pension. That's not our task. We're not going to predict how the pension is going to do. That's not our task. Our task is to look at what you guys have projected and the payments due and what's the impact on the site mission. We need to understand that before we can then make recommendations. So I think it's very important that we understand the pension. I understand it certainly a lot better than I did 4 hours ago. But I think we have a lot more questions at our next meeting we need to get answered, but we also need to understand what would be the potential impact to the site mission. So we really need to understand what that means. $300 million coming out of the EM and NNSA budget, right? Mm-hmm. How does that shake out in mission impact? We need to understand that also, I believe. I'm just putting that on the record. Oh, here he is.
John Lopez, DOE. We have done that study, and it's pretty devastating for the site. And we are actually put together a position paper that's that somebody in headquarters is working on. Is going to actually take this to the secretary for Secretary Perry. But basically, if we go up to the pension payments of $300 million a year, we're basically taking everything at the site to min-safe levels. So there will be no progress made at the site. There will be no more tanks cleaned. There will be no processing in the canyons. We will be at min-safe levels.
Could you share that with us after headquarters approves it, or?
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, that would be great.
Bob Dorcab, though, I want to go back to this discount rate again.
Well,
if I
hang
could,
on,
please.
because she had her card up first. So if we can get her question, and then we can.
Joyce Underwood, Cab. I'm not sure who this question is directed towards. This is more of an administrative sort of thing. I don't know if this is relevant, but I feel like it would help my understanding of this if we could get some kind of a chart that shows the relationships between DOE, Westinghouse, and all these other entities that are all apparently working together on this. Is that a thing that I could get? Maybe? Yeah. That could be provided in the future? Okay, and am I allowed to ask a question about this document?
Sure, you can ask me.
Oh, okay. These ones at the bottom that get all the funding, do they have less population?
No.
Like, or employees?
Those ones at the bottom are the California. Andy Swalina, retiree. Those ones at the bottom are the California facilities. And the California facilities, originally, I'd have to take it back to 1950 or 1940, when we were in the Manhattan Project and so forth working. These people corralled most of the great mines to build the nuclear weapons. And in order to attract and retain the best minds in the country, they offered great packages of, large benefits and so on to attract and retain those people. The Savannah River site was one of the lowest labor cost facilities in the country. You didn't have to offer a lot of money to get somebody off of a tractor out of a cotton field to come to work at the site. And so these numbers have been low. Unfortunately, we're paying the same fees as the people in California for health benefits and so on. And so those pensions look awfully low now. They're very down. There are some people, some retirees, who are receiving only $300 to $400 a month pension after working 30 years at the site right now. And that's hardly keeps them afloat. But that's why, it's because the California labs were trying to attract the best and brightest people back in the 1950s.
So to clarify, it's not because there's less people getting paid at those sites?
No.
There's
No,
more?
there's
Okay,
more.
okay, that's what I wanted to know.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. Bob.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Bob Dorcap, again on slide 3, the discount rate, which is very critical to future pension contributions by this plan and all corporate plans. Jim, I know you told us very clearly, Congress, through the IRS, dictates the discount rate, which, the higher the discount rate, the lower the pension contribution, the higher the corporate profit that's eligible to be taxed. The out-year discount rates, as they trend down, are those government, has Congress already set those rates, or is that just kind of speculation as to what those rates will be?
Yeah, so what Congress did through the IRS is that they didn't set the rate per se. I oversimplified. What they did was they set how to determine that rate. And that rate is based on, I believe, corporate bonds, high-grade corporate securities. And what they did, though, was and this is a good question for David because he can explain it much better than I do. It's a 25-year average of those rates. And what they did was they set a corridor around those rates to say that you could be higher than those rates by 20% or 25%. I forget, I don't know those values. And as you go into the future, you narrow that corridor down to it disappearing, and then you're with that rate, how it's determined. So I can see there's a lot of interest from you as to how this rate is calculated. That's going to be one of the things that I need David here to fully explain to you, because I understand how the interest rate works, but I can't really explain to you how it's calculated well enough to satisfy your curiosity.
Well, no, thank you, James, because I'll just make one last comment. I mean, if the Congress needs, if the U.S. government needs more eligible corporate profits to tax, then all they have to do is just raise the discount rate. It'll decrease the pension contribution, which would allow for more scope of work, but it doesn't really, it could potentially increase future unfunded liabilities in the pension plan.
Thank you. So
And just to be clear, we don't get a tax deduction for these contributions or anything, so this really doesn't impact us except to the extent that it affects our contribution level.
So I think we've maybe hit a point where our questions are maybe not necessarily on this presentation itself, and we're looking at some matters that are going beyond that, and that's okay. But maybe what we ought to do is, if you have remaining questions that are going beyond that, let's put them in an email and send them to me, and I can pass them on to Jim Barry, Joe DeVia over there, and they can start putting together what the educational package is going to look like in January and where we need to go from there. How does that sound?
That'd be good.
Okay. So with that, I think that you might be close to your end point for the evening, Tom.
I am. I think we are. So
We did that earlier. Are there any questions from the public? I'm sorry, I did make that promise.
He broke his promise almost.
I did break my promise, almost.
I made sure you kept it.
Thank you.
hearing no questions, Jim, thank you for doing this.
You're
And
welcome.
Great job.
You brought us all a long way.
And we'll see you in January.
Yeah, and then if in January you could also share with us the scope impact, then we can see how the two things fit together.